What is the worst case of psycho-overprotective parenting that you've ever seen? Yes, I've been waiting for this. So I met my wife on OkCupid. We were about 21 at the time. I came into her life at a bad moment. She was failing classes, anxiety prone, etc. Eventually she got asked to take a leave of absence from her school. Against my better advice, she didn't tell her parents, went back to the school to pack up her stuff and figure out what her next move way. Well, her parents found out within that next day or so, and her dad flew some odd 1,000 miles to get her and go back home. But this was the next thing, they cut her off from the world. She couldn't go out of the house unless it was to the schools that they enrolled her in to get her back in good standing. She dropped off the face of the earth. Her mom spent time writing all of her friends, pretending to be her, stating that they could not be friends and that she was moving on with her life. Her mom did the same to me. Eventually I got a hold of her and we had to talk secret for months on end. We started dating and she graduated and we kept talking. Well, she finally moves out of her parents' house and comes to visit me some 1,000 miles away. Her parents cut her cell phone off. When she gets back to her hometown, they demand she comes over. They confiscate some items of hers that I gave her and told her to never speak to me again. That doesn't work, of course. Eventually we say fuck it, because they are batshit crazy. We are talking the mother mailing me that she knew who many managers were and could call them and let them some faking craziness and get married. When we finally tell them, which is like a month or two after it happens, the mom played the victim, like we didn't even give her the chance to get to know me and to like me. And I'm just like, bitch, you impersonated your daughter and told me that you wanted nothing to do with me. Your daughter told you that we would be together and you threatened to disown her. As you could see, this completely works me up. Nonetheless, now the mother refuses to speak either of us, has manipulated the bull-lesser's father into not speaking to his own child, and the teenaged younger sister thinks that my wife is the world's most awful person for choosing to live her life. For fact's sake. My boss has a baby and a 4-year-old, and they are super overprotective. Like, the 4-year-old still sleeps in their bed with them and the baby, and they haven't left either kid alone with another person ever. Sometimes he talks about how they've never been out since the kids. Like I can relate. I have a pair myself, but we still live our lives. The 4-year-old went to preschool, so the mom went with him and sat in the class every day and even sat at his table and played with him instead of letting him interact with peers. One time they were in the office and my boss hand fed him food because he didn't want the kid handling the food himself. Since the kid had recently touched the computer recently, he was describing their garden and how the food at the back never gets picked because we can't go back there ever because of the baby, you know. No, I have no idea. You live on a small fenced lot in the suburbs. What are you afraid of getting to your baby if you walk out to the corner of your yard? The worst part is, he's constantly telling me how tired he is and how his kids never sleep, but it's probably because they are all sleeping in the same bed, waking each other up all the time. Both of my kids were in their own room by a couple of months old, and it made life so much easier. When they're in the room with you, you notice every little noise. Well, there's this new popular post making the rounds on Facebook about how when on the street you must carry your child in your arms at all times. Never let him walk, not even if you're holding his hand or on a leash, as it makes them too easy targets for snatching point, and obviously never take them out to play. You'd have to let them do stuff and it's too dangerous. It also has a couple extra interesting advice. You should make posts of any person that seems to be lingering about. They're probably kidnappers looking at your kids. I've also seen several posts of random people on stores because someone thought they looked suspicious. Marizo, if they are males buying stuff that only women are supposed to buy, like fabrics or cleaning supplies, if you ever lose sight of your child, immediately consider it a kidnapping. Edit. Looking for the post. In the meantime, this is a new warning. Sorry, it's in Spanish, but it tells you to never go to the supermarket alone with your kids, ages 1 through 20. Always bring along the father, as you can't be constantly holding him, since you might need to let go of him to push the cart or grab stuff. Edit. To print this page, to add your child's personal info, fingerprints and some hair clips for DNA identification. carry it with you always, to have everything ready when, if, your child is kidnapped. My parents are super strict with me. I'm the youngest of 3. There is an age gap of 12 and 10 between my older siblings and I. My parents were not really strict with my older siblings as they are with me. I can understand why, because my sister Anne often got married and pregnant. She is now in an abusive relationship that is very much poisonous. My brother is clinically depressed and spends his days at work or in his room. I understand the reasons why my parents want to keep a close leash on me, but sometimes I feel very suffocated. I was not allowed to go to the mall with my friends alone until I was 17 years old. I would always have to beg my parents to let me go to the school dances and school events. My brother and my sister even agree with my parents about not letting me go anywhere. I feel like this way of living has taken a toll on my life. I live in America and I would always see my friends hanging out with each other at the mall or at a restaurant. They would post it on Facebook and would always wish that it was me who was able to hang out with friends. I would just lay in bed all day and not do anything productive. Eventually, when I did start going out with friends, my mom would only let me leave for 3 hours at a time. She would start calling me and blowing not only my phone, but also my friend's phone. I was really embarrassed, so I just never went out. I developed anxiety from this, which I still suffer from. Bottom line, let your kids have some fun and just trust them that they are going to do the right thing. Oh, I got one right for this one. I've mentioned it before in some other threads, but I just can't get over how batshit insane this woman is. A good friend of mine has lived with his grandparents his whole life. It's just his grandma now, and she's insanity turned to 11. I've known this guy since high school. It took 4 years before I was allowed to go into his house because his grandma didn't like the fact I have long hair. She didn't want a hippie in the house. When he did leave the house, she would call around 8 to 9 p.m. and ask when he's going to be home. Well, I use ask loosely. It was more like pestering him that he needs to get home. She continues to call every 30 minutes or so. There's been no repercussions from him completely ignoring this. The point when she goes out of the house, he has to go with her. I understand she may have a fear of going out alone, and that's probably bolstered a bit by her watching of Fox News, but they live in a very low crime area. There's been one shooting in the last decade, no muggings/armed robberies of people, and the only thing the cops really have to respond to are people stealing from Walmart. Point, his car got totaled 2 years ago. He still doesn't have another one because she won't let him save the money to get another one. He always has to pay vast majority of bills and rent, despite her being fully able to pay her share as well. He can't just refuse because she'll eventually kick him out, and that threat holds more weight now since he doesn't have a car. He's using hers to go back and forth to work. Point, several years back we went on vacation and she told us not to go to a place that was on our agenda because it was a bad area. We told her we wouldn't. Of course, we did anyway, and surprise, not a single problem at all. Point, can't have any alcohol. He sneaks it in anyway, has to leave the door to his room open, and no bad language. In all honesty, she treats him like a 12-year-old. He's in his upper 20s. I already said something about the family in a previous thread, but I still have a good answer and sweet karma, am I right? Anyway, there was this family of 2 parents and 4 kids that had the most overprotective health nut mom ever, and she also was a very strict conservative Christian. Their dad wasn't the same way, but he pretty much allowed her to be strict like she was. She wouldn't let her kids do things that most normal kids were allowed to do, like eat any food that wasn't organic and wholesome. She believed that GMO and HCF caused bad problems later in life. She also hated microwaves and wouldn't let her kids use them, watch anything with any hint of the supernatural that didn't have to do with God. So that meant no Disney princesses, no Star Wars, no Harry Potter, no Lord of the Rings, no celebrating Christmas or Halloween. Those are pagan holidays. No violence or swearing, or such in anything. My friend from that family had a Gamma Cube with a few games on it. He used to have Super Smash Bros. Melee, but his mom took Smash Bros. Because it was too violent for him. Point, I feel sorry for her kids. I know the oldest boy is going to be far from the perfect kid his mom wants him to be, and the girls will probably follow suit. I know when I have kids, I will not be the same way. My sister was by far the worst I've ever met. She was a typical shitty teenager in high school, doing the whole "I'm 17, I'm grown, you can't tell me what to do" thing, including drinking, drugs, and such, none of which I have any problem with, but probably aren't a good idea if you don't possess the responsibility to deal with them. She got knocked up at 17 by a dude who bailed on her, and she took about 1.5 tons of reality to the face and decided to turn her life around. Problem is, she swung too far back in the other direction and became a super fundamentalist Christian and chalked her getting knocked up by a transient Mexican farm worker and literally everything else to God's plan. After my nephew was born, things didn't start to get bad until he was around 7 or 8 and developed his own personality. She started forcing him to go to church and catechism against his wishes. She also severely restricted the information and media he was allowed access to. Books were restricted solely to the Bible and other religious texts and educational books, so long as they didn't contradict scripture in any way. She refused to allow him to have friends unless she'd vetted them and ensured they came from a good Christian family. Until he was 16, the only television he was allowed to watch was Disney Channel and CNN. She put parental block on everything else. He wasn't allowed to see movies rated above PG or get his driver's license until he was 18, and she couldn't really stop him anymore. Video games were right out of the question. The end result of his sheltered upbringing was that, as soon as he was a legal adult, he began to rebel against everything she'd ever imposed on him in whatever way he could find. He started drinking and doing drugs, stopped going to church or any of the religious studies groups she made him go to, and fell in with a group of guys who got him in a fair amount of trouble. Thankfully he's calmed down recently, in his early 20s. He's in college now, still drinks and smokes weed, but not nearly as much as he used to, and, to my knowledge, hasn't committed a crime in a few years. My coworker has made her poor 13-year-old terrified of the world. Coworker proudly brags about how she has always told her daughter to never allow herself to be alone at any time, because the world is full of murder rapists lurking around every corner, just waiting to kidnap her. As a result, the daughter is an absolute nervous wreck at all times. The daughter calls my coworker every morning before she leaves for the school bus in tears because she has to walk half a block to the bus stop by herself. Then she'll call every afternoon crying hysterically because she has to walk home from the bus by herself and let herself into the house. She's terrified of everything. Every noise is someone trying to break in. She'll call her mom freaking out about seeing a car drive down the road that she didn't recognize. I feel bad for the poor girl. Imagine being thoroughly convinced that you'll be kidnapped and wrapped and murdered any second, every day. So sad. Edit. I don't care what all you people think of me for not calling CPS. Clearly none of you ever dealt with them. The bottom line is that a call to CPS will do nothing to help this kid. She's not being hit, she's not being molested, and she's not being neglected. They will not do anything. The only thing a call to CPS would do in this case is turn her mother's paranoia up to 11. If I thought it would actually help, I would call. I'm not a faking monster. I don't need to feel guilty or blame myself over choosing to not make this girl's life even more of a nightmare than it already is. If she was being hit, neglected, or molested, maybe it would help to call, and I would point. CPS is not the all-powerful fix everything after one tip institution you all seem to think it is. The abuse/neglect needs to be obvious, provable, and extreme in order for them to intervene in any meaningful way. And the older the child is, the less likely they are to get help at all. CPS is designed to keep families together. Ask any social worker how they feel about CPS, and I guarantee you, they will have dozens of stories about how unhelpful CPS actually is. I refuse to give her mother the push she needs to lock that poor child in the house until she's 18 like some kind of actually afraid of the world mother goes. My best childhood friend mom was an overprotective bitch. After his dad left him, she practically went insane. She went and enrolled him in counseling before putting him on a shit ton of psych meds, some of which being her own meds not prescribed by a doctor. One night he locked himself in his room to Skype his dad. He left his mom because she was overprotective, and his mom came upstairs and like busted down his door with a chair or some sheet and took his laptop away and told him he was never supposed to talk to his dad ever again. So he threatened to run away or kill himself. So she sent him to a mental rehabilitation camp for about a year. After he got home he was extremely depressed and told me, when we were alone, that he never wanted to stay with his mom ever again. Then about a month later he packed his stuff and had printed out legit adoption papers and was planning to run away to my house and let my parents adopt him. His mom caught him and drugged him with a heavy sedative for their dog who had just gotten surgery. She called an ambulance and had him moved to a mental asylum where he still is today and will be till 2017. I get to see him about once a year on his birthday when my mom drives me up to see him. It is really sad because he is a normal kid just with a super overprotective mother, and she has ruined his life. When he gets out I will be going into my freshman year of college, and I'm planning to pick him up and never take him back to his mom. Take him in as a little brother. My boyfriend and I were on a cruise, which stopped at multiple islands. We were insane kids hanging out on the beach, where they had a little open bar, to get food and drinks. When we first got on the beach, we went early, so we can get chairs. After 20 minutes, an older couple with a few little kids, all girls, insisted we had taken their chairs, that they had previously reserved, but they had no tags on the chairs, so they walked a ways down the beach. Anyways, we're at this little tiki bar thing getting food and drinks when one of the little girls of the older couple wearing a huge bucket hat is wandering around the front of a gift shop where there were wooden stairs. All of a sudden, the little girl isn't paying attention and walks up the stairs and bumps her head on a tree and falls down 2 steps. We saw the whole time and she barely bumped her head, but as a child I probably would have cried too. The mother ran over to the little girl screaming, oh my god, are you alright? What happened to you? What happened? Oh my god. Totally made the situation worse and the little girl started screaming even more. When the dad turns to us and asks if we saw anything, we just said she bumped her head and fell, no big deal. The dad literally rolled his eyes and told his wife to calm the fuck down. Have an acquaintance with 2 kids. Oldest daughter is a princess. Is now 21, size 16 but thinks she's a size 4. Mother has a mental note of everyone who has missed one of her princess parties. Goes back at least 5 years. And she throws some huge damn parties for this ungrateful large waste of air. For every birthday, for her 18th she hired a pack of paparazzi to follow her around all day taking pictures of her shopping and her multiple clothing changes. Graduation from high school, barely made it. First day of community college, lasted exactly 1 week, and whatever occasion she can throw a party for her. She does. Younger son, just graduated from high school, decided to go out of state to college, with his on again, off again girlfriend. They are 18. He is actually taking online courses, but mama got him a 2-bedroom apartment, furnished it completely down to the silverware, and lives there 2 weeks out of the month. With her son and his girlfriend. These 2 people are totally incapable of doing anything on their own. Daughter thinks world revolves around her and can't understand why people don't fawn over her constantly. Son freaked out when the power went out during a storm. Needs directions texted to him because he couldn't figure out where the grocery store was. It's exhausting being around her with her phone going constantly. Just remembered she had to send a YouTube video to her son to show him how to replace the toilet paper roll. He couldn't understand her directions. Sheesh. My father used to be a gymnastics coach and judge. One of the few people in my state that was a level 3 in both men's and women's gymnastics. What that means is that he could coach and judge regional, state and national camps, but not international ones. At one of the regional camps my father was judging at, he was approached by one of the parents of the gymnasts asking for her child to get at least a 9.3 to stay in her club's elite team. Her child was averaging a 9.0 across the camp. My father reported it to the head judge, and it wasn't the first time she has been warned to not approach the judges during the camp. When the session ended, the head judge called in all the judges and told them that if the woman approached them again, to send her directly to the head judge. An hour into the next session she approached another judge on the same table as my father and the head judge. She was ejected from the camp and her child was disqualified. When parents agree to enter kids into camps they have a page of rules they have to agree to. One of them is not to approach judges until after the awards are presented. If they do their child may be disqualified. TLDR. Parent approached judge at camp asking for score to be changed for her kid several times. She gets ejected and her kid gets disqualified. Oh boy, here we go. Let's talk about my sophomore year homecoming dance last year. It's a really long story, so hang on tight. Okay, so I was friends with this freshman boy named Ethan. He's a super nice guy, very funny, and very quirky. It's a month before homecoming, and he asks me, hey, do you want to go to HC with me just as friends? And of course I said sure, because why not? Now it gets crazy. We exchanged our mother's phone numbers so that they could plan everything out, dinner, being brought to and from the dance, etc. So my mom calls her later that night and the woman has planned out everything about that night in about 4 hours. Turns out she's also pregnant and due the night of the dance. Fantastic night of homecoming swings around and his dad brings him to take pictures and bring us to dinner and then the dance. His dad is super laid back and jokes around with me and Ethan and says he's very lucky that I agreed to go with him. I thought nothing of the comment. We go to dinner and our meals were already pre-ordered and prepaid so that we could just get going. When we were done, Ethan walked up to the counter and the manager, who apparently was friends with Ethan's mom, came back to our little table and said, your mother called for this, right? Yes sir, she told me to keep an eye on you to make sure you eat everything on your plate. Ethan was embarrassed and I didn't admit that I was getting a sneaking suspicion that something was off. We're in the middle of eating dinner and his mom keeps texting him. If he doesn't answer in 2 minutes she calls him and screams at him, and I mean I could hear it across the table 4 feet between us. She's yelling at him for not taking pictures of everything, our food, my corsage, our pictures from earlier, etc. It was the most awkward dinner because I couldn't even start a conversation with him without his mom calling and screaming again. So we left the restaurant after either of us barely ate our food, and we are 3 blocks from the restaurant. At this point I feel awful for Ethan. He then mirror a text from his mom, where's my picture with the mural? There was a huge mural on the side of the restaurant that we were supposed to take a pic with. Oops. So we go back to the restaurant and take the picture, and he sends it to her right before she calls and screams how he's messing everything up. Jesus Christ woman, leave him alone, he's a nervous wreck. So we get to the dance and we meet up with my best friend Marcy and her date Carl. We go out on the dance floor and Marcy and I try teaching Ethan and Carl how to dance. It doesn't go well, but it's fun to see them try. We decided we wanted to go and sit down, so we head to the rec room where we sit with a bunch of marching band friends. Ethan checks his phone, 20 missed calls from his mom and 15 minutes along with voicemails and texts. Great point, he leaves to handle his mother while I stay with Marcy, Carl, John, who I had a crush on, and a couple others. I had a blast with them in the rec room until Carl comes back. I check the time and it's been a half hour. We all go out to the dance floor and have fun again. At some point, the rose on my corsage fell off and Marcy picked it up and asked Ethan, what should we do with this? And he said, I don't really care at this point, my mother's going to kill me already. So she chucks it perfectly into the middle of the grinding circle 20 feet away. As soon as a rose goes out of sight, Ethan drops to his knees, yelling, no, I needed a picture of that. Well, sheet point, we switch between the rec room and the dance floor for the rest of the night. Ethan's constantly on his phone getting yelled at by his mom or taking pictures of the dance, so I spent most of the night with marching band friends. That part was more fun than any other part of the night. We go back to my house a couple hours after this constantly happening, and he asks if he could come upstairs for a couple more pictures for his mom. Say, okay, sure, I can do a couple more. So he comes inside and my mom takes more pics of us. He starts freaking out about the corsage picture again, and my mom takes a very pixelated and zoomed in picture of my wrist from one of our many photos. He says it's good enough and he leaves. On Monday it turns out his mom grounded him for not taking pictures of everything and not answering his phone when she called. So he didn't have a phone for a month. And that's the story of how my sophomore year homecoming was almost ruined. My parents were weird. They were very strict in a lot of ways. For example, I was never allowed to listen to music that wasn't Christian until I was about a freshman in high school. I was never allowed to have a girlfriend even as a senior in high school. I still dated people of course, but I had to sneak around and lie constantly. When I would get caught all hell would break loose. My parents had all my passwords to everything, social media, email, you name it. I was never allowed to have a girl over the house, even in group settings. Because according to my mom, guys and girls can't be just friends. She claimed it to be literally impossible. My parents would also spy on me constantly and listen on and just about all of my phone calls, to the point where if I called someone I had to make sure all the phones in the house were in my room. I was never allowed to have a phone, but they always had to know what I was doing. So they had all my friends' phone numbers and would call them constantly when I was with them. They wouldn't let me hang out with people unless I told them exactly what our plans were. So telling them that I was going to a friend's house to hang out just to hang out, which was the truth 100% of the time, I had to come up with some random itinerary. That all being said though, they still let me do things. For being very strict parents, they were also not very strict in some ways. Most of the times I had to bend over backwards to be able to do stuff, but every once in a while they just didn't seem to care. Amazingly enough, I have a very good relationship with them, which is mostly due to the fact I live across the country from them. My best friend is Korean and his parents were super strict and traditional. He had to work in finance/law/healthcare and had to marry a Korean girl that fit prototypical mold of a Korean housewife. Naturally, he resisted and ended up meeting a girl, OkCupid, an adorable white girl from Minnesota that worked as a flight attendant. Rewinding a little, his parents helped him put a down payment on a condo with the condition that they get to have a set of keys to show up and help him do housework and whatnot. Back to the present, he continued seeing this girl, who flew to New York as often as she could. A couple of times he had her over. His parents showed up unannounced. They would call when they were blocks away, and she hid in the closet for hours on end. One night, his mom showed up completely unannounced, no phone call, and she saw the white girl in the apartment. My friend just told the truth, and his mom, a religious Christian, started bursting in tears and fell onto her knees and started to pray in semi-tongue, saying things like "remove the devil from my son" and blah blah. Before she left, she ordered him to break up with her. I met up with both of them, and they were visibly angry and distraught, and lots of drinks were had. A few hours later they were just gonna head home, but while he was out with me, his sister had been calling him with warnings that his mom and now his dad were waiting for him at the apartment. Of course, he didn't get any of the messages because his phone had died. They arrive at the apartment in total shock, and almost instantly the dad orders my friend's sister to take her away and send her to a hotel. My friend and the girl were both drunk, but sobering up, and she started bursting into tears saying "I love you," holding her arms out toward him while being dragged out by the sister. The next morning I saw my phone had about 10 voicemails, all from the girl. She was hysterical, saying things like "what do I do?" 10 seconds of silence, "I love him," and then things like "ahhh," and so on. Didn't know the girl personally, more of a friend situation. Anyway, my friend Jay, this girl Rachel, and myself were all doing some volunteer work together after school. It's the middle of fall, and it's getting cold and dark, so my friend Jay offers to give her a ride home, since he was dropping me off too. She agrees, but says that her mom would be livid if she knew that a boy gave her a ride in his car. What we ended up doing was driving to her street, but parking a block down, so her mom couldn't see us. Yes, her mom was watching for the car from the front window. Then I switched spots with my friend Jay for the driver's seat, while Rachel sat in shotgun and Jay got into the back seat. At this point in time, I was technically not supposed to be driving, since I didn't have a permit. But it was only a block, so I drove slowly and parked the car in front of the house. The mom had already opened the door and was waiting for Rachel and I to come in the house. Rachel had also warned me her mom wanted to ask me a few questions. I braced myself and tried to be as charming as possible. I got the shakedown from this woman. She asked me who I was, what my relationship to her daughter was, did I attend church, who was Jay, and what was he doing with his life, and a lot more questions I can't remember. I do remember the mom was pissed at us. Not only did Rachel get a ride home with a complete stranger, not really, we were acquaintances for a bit before this, but there was Gasper Boy in the back of the car. I thought for sure she was going to ask to see my license and registration. Rachel did the best she could to stand up for me and Jay, repeatedly telling her mom not to worry, we were only in the car together for 15 minutes, and a bunch of other stuff. Things were getting pretty tense. Her mom's face was turning redder than a fire truck as I answered her questions. Finally, Rachel thanked me for getting her home, while her mom huffed at me, and I left. I could sense that an argument was about to break out, and I did not want to be there for the fallout. I got back into my friend Jay's car, and Jay told me to drive down the rest of the block, make a right, and we'd pull over as soon as we were out of sight of Rachel's house and the eyes of her ever watchful mom. We did, and then Jay and I talked about Rachel's crazy mom the rest of the way home. Poor girl. The funniest part about this whole adventure of ours was Jay and his car. Jay is gay. Lol, I know. But he offered to do something nice for her, because he's a nice person. Furthermore, from the outside his car was a normal little white sedan. On the inside there was a giant poster of Lady Gaga tacked to the ceiling. I think he also had his spandex/glitter/Christmas light costume from going to a Lady Gaga concert at some point. It still baffles me to think about how little trust this woman had for her daughter. She was so mad that her child would dare to get a ride home from her fellow volunteers. When we saw her again next week for volunteering hours, she told us she was grounded for the next couple of months, couldn't go out to see her few approved friends, and she was never allowed to get a ride home from me again. But she was actually really calm about the whole thing, telling us that she's not mad at us or anything. I still find the whole situation to be just nuts. I knew a girl in from 7th 12th grade whose mother would lurk outside the school and verbally attack any student that bullied her daughter during our college entrance exams. She spent the whole 3 hours of each of the 7 exams stationed outside the school, waiting for me to come out. When I did, she asked me extreme details about the questions and answers on the exam. It was obvious she had studied almost better than I had, and I got a the 17th of May 20 average, mind you. After she was done asking elaborate questions, which took nearly 40 minutes, she would immediately ask if her daughter seemed okay, and if I thought she had it under control, or if she seemed stressed. I met this girl and her mother a year later. Her mom apparently drives her to college, which is 1 hour away by car and 2 hours by transit. She then asked me to teach her daughter how to commute to college, which weirded me the fuck out. That's not my job. I did it, but apparently taking a bus was too hard for her, so her mom continued to drive her to college. Meanwhile, one of my friends was friends with this girl in childhood up to the point when I met her, and she told me that she didn't know how to tie her shoes until she was about 11 cause her mom would tie them for her personally. I had a very crazy accident when I was a kid by falling in a gap and twisting my leg so bad that I was almost permanently crippled. After that, my mom wouldn't even let me hop from a 30 centimeters high ledge to the ground. She also demanded that I call her every time I made it safely to college or wherever I was going to hang out with my friends. It took a year of fights and yelling for her to accept that I was going to outright ignore her demand. My mom was always really paranoid about me. I never learned how to ride a bike or drive a car because she didn't allow me to. I think she was afraid of allowing me any mobility. She also drove me to school every day up through the end of high school, even though it was less than a mile away, and I would have gladly rather walked, or God forbid, learned to drive myself. I never made any friends as a small child because I wasn't allowed to leave the house without her, and she never wanted to go outside. When all my friends talk about how much fun summer vacation was when they were kids, running around the neighborhood having shenanigans, my memories are of sitting alone quietly in my empty house while my mom worked. Every year, I dreaded summer. When I was a young child we moved into her parents' spare bedroom and had a bunk bed, since there was only one room. Then when I was around 11 we moved out into a 3-bedroom trailer, just the two of us, and she made us continue to share a bedroom. We slept in those bunks until I was 18 and got to move away to college. Also none of the doors, except the bathroom door, could ever be closed. Needless to say I never ever allowed any of my friends to come visit me, which really stunted my social growth and has left me kind of weird about socializing even as an adult. And speaking of friends, I had to lie about having any male friends because she was convinced I was having orgies with them from the age of 12 onwards, so I always made up convoluted lies about who I was hanging out with and what I was doing. She was also convinced I was drinking and on drugs from about the same age because I was acting so different than you used to. Oh yeah, it's called adolescence and realizing your mom is a control freak. The lesson, if there is one, is don't try to insulate your kids from the world or stymie their growth. They will only devise more nefarious ways to lie to you and never trust you again. When I worked in the housing office for a local university, I had a mom come in with her adult child to talk about the suite/building her daughter was assigned to. I don't remember the content of the conversation, but I made a point of trying to talk to the student directly as much as possible. Mom was furious that I was ignoring her questions and told me to ignore her daughter, who was standing there staring at the floor. As it turns out, the daughter was in a master's program and older than I was at the time, but mom was still in charge. I now work in a different office on campus and the number of parents who come in or call to complain about their adult child's classes/grades/employability is insane. I refuse to talk to parents about their adult child's education and tell them to have their son/daughter come to the office in person with their student card to ask these questions. If they argue, I mention privacy regulations and apologize that I can't be of more help, but their child is an adult and I have to talk to them directly. Some parents try to argue this, but there's nothing they can do unless they come with son/daughter to the office in person. If that happens, I go out of my way to make a point of talking to the student, even if the parent tries to control the conversation. Parents tend to get the point by then. My job is to help these students become socialized, functional adults, and I have no interest in allowing overbearing helicopter parents derail that progress. My time to shine. Kinda different from being an overprotective parent and instead just a psycho parent, but stay with me. Okay, so a few years ago I nannied for a upper middle class family. The father was an incredibly highly paid psychologist for the military and the mother worked in high-end banking stuff. No idea, really. They had adopted a 4-year-old boy from the Philippines, whom had become self-sufficient, as best a 4-year-old can. When he lives in a poverty-stricken orphanage for the first few years of his life, he could use the bathroom, get his own food, entertain himself for hours. However, upon arriving in Australia, the faked-up parents decided the best way to earn his trust was to unteach him these life skills. It was as if the dad was conducting his own psychological experiment with the child. 'Cause, you know, it's not a matter of proving your love and support to the child that gains a child's trust. By the time I was nannying this poor kid, he was completely reliant on other people's help. They made him wear nappies to school. He needed help wiping after using the toilet, and instead of paying attention to him, they bought him expensive toys every day, and I mean, every day. To the point that his room resembled a weird rich kid's hoarder space. They never made him eat vegetables, punished him for acting out, which he did regularly, and he mostly sat around and watched TV. Now clearly this bizarre case of parenting was a matter of look how kind and rich we are. We are so philanthropic we actually adopted a kid. It got to the point where I tossed up whether or not to call docs, Aussie CPS, because of the extreme psychological abuse this kid was subject to. However, I knew I had no cases on paper. This family looked perfect. But once you were a nanny and got into the nitty-gritty of it all, it was clear that they were absolutely insane. When I quit, because I was offered a high-paying role in my usual field of work, which I gave them months of notice about, the mother blew up at me, called me petty, spoiled and selfish, and said she would never give me a good reference. I just apologized for any inconvenience I had caused, and offered to find a replacement nanny as I'm friends with many nannies. She continued abusing me by text until a week later, when it came to the day I usually nannied, she sent me a text saying she forgave me and would allow me to do one more shift so I could see the little boy again. Clearly I did not want to have anything to do with these insane monsters, and I honestly think she was more upset about having to spend more time with the kid while they searched for a replacement nanny. Point of the story is, they were a pack of cunts, and I find myself worrying about the boy's future. He is going to have some serious issues with trust and authority whilst being incredibly rich and spoiled. It was very hard working with him as he was a monster child, but I had to remind myself daily that it was not his fault his parents were insane dickheads. I'm 16 years old, and I have a very overprotective father. There are a lot of things that he wouldn't let me do for crazy reasons. If I meet up with a friend at a shopping mall or whatever, he has be walking with my friend or friends and I know excuses. He will follow us to every shop we go. If we went to the bathroom, he will wait outside the ladies. Then if he was walking with us and saw a shop that he'd want to go in and take a look at, my friend or friends and I would have to follow him to that shop until he was done. I was forbidden to walk very fast. It would make my dad think that I'm trying to run away. As a girl, I'm not allowed to have long hair, bribing below the shoulders. For the whole 16 years of my life, my dad controlled how my hair looks like. The typical cut that I'd get from the hairdressers is either a pixie cut or a short bob. When I asked him why wasn't I allowed to have my own hair on my head that I could style, he'd say, "You're only 16. You're a schoolgirl too. Long hair makes you look old. Short hair presents your natural beauty and your youth." I know what I'm doing. Don't argue with me. Now this makes me really mad, because as a teenager, I'm obviously starting to care about my looks and I look really fucking hideous with short hair. But he thinks otherwise. The longest hair I've had is until my shoulders. Also, I must always have a fringe. I cannot have a side parting, which makes me look pretty good. I must have a goddamn fringe point. Cannot wear any sorts of makeup, dangling earrings or tie my hair up if I get hot. No colored lip balm for me, or pretty earrings for me to wear, because it's age inappropriate. No mascara or anything for a 16-year-old, because it's age inappropriate. I'm even lucky he lets me wear nail polish. Also, I can't wear sandals because it's age inappropriate and ugly. My phone must always be checked and see whether here's any suspicious activity going on. This means that all my chats with friends and family must be read. Also, he has the passwords for my social media account and occasionally goes into my account and posts things for me to make me seem active to all my followers and whatever. If I attempt to change the password of my account, I'll get a scolding, and I'm forced to tell it to him. My parents are divorced. I go to stay with my mom on the weekends when she's free and isn't working. I'm only allowed to go and stay with my mother under the condition that I give him a status update, a message saying where I am and what I'm doing, every 30 minutes. If I'm late on time, I'll get an angry call message of my dad being angry at me for not sending the status update. He also must approve of the places that I'm going to with my mom during the weekends. Can't think of anything else, but that's pretty the big issues. My dad is very overprotective, and it's firing me nuts. No time for me to grow up and discover things. Just trapped by his rules. Seriously can't wait till I'm 18 so I can escape from this madness. Oh, this isn't the parents, but the brother's ex-one. Parents weren't approving of me because we weren't from the same country of origin. Worried that we won't get along with the fam, etc. So asked us to let it go. She didn't want to, and I told them that I had good intention and wanted to be with her. Her brother decided to step in. Cut off her internet by locking her MAC address. Cut off her phone's connection by 10 PM. Going through her Facebook to unfriend me every chance he gets. He was a younger brother ex too. Her brother was my roommate, and he was older than her by a year-ish. I was with his sister for about 4+ years. Asked her parents for permission. Everyone was good to go. I told him that I'm planning to propose and got the approval from the parents. He told me no when I was literally just telling him. So I asked him to tell me why he was not comfortable and what could I do to make him feel better about the whole thing. He gave me a list of craps to do. I did all he asked. 4 months later, I told him that I did everything he'd asked, so I was going to propose on this then weekend. He left to go home to his sister to give his side about why she shouldn't marry me yet. So when I go to pick her up, she started bawling, and I was sitting there with her talking whether we should get married or not. Half a day later, we decided to go for it. I proposed. She said yes. He stopped talking to her, and she fell into depression. She dumped me 4 days before the wedding. He left my place and never came back when I was home. Left his crap there for 3 more months without paying the rent. Her mom never tried to step in. Besides, he just needs times when I needed the damn rent money. I probably have dodged some bullets, family, but it still left some bitterness. Here's just a few experiences with my mom. She's ultra religious and overbearing. She gets off on snooping on everyone. When I was probably 14, she confronted me and scolded me because she discovered that I had wrote in very small print in one of my notebooks, "Sperm bank, if you build it they will come." She also sat down with my sister and I and did a Bible study on why masturbation is bad when she suspected we were masturbating. When I was 19, before the age of cell phones, I was studying with a group for a test till about 2 AM. She knew there was a girl in the group. When I got home she was waiting for me to tell me off. I just ignored her and went to bed. I then found out the next day that she had called every number that she could find on the caller ID for that girl. She called her parents, sister, and baby daddy around 1 AM. I was so embarrassed. When I turned 18, my friend and I were excited to go to a strip club for the first time. The next day I got scolded for going to a strip club. I have no idea how she could have known. I used all cash and didn't use the ATM there. I can only assume that she was following me. This wouldn't surprise me in the least point. As soon as I could afford to, I moved 1,300 miles away. I can also safely say that I was completely faked when it came to dating. My dad wasn't exactly the greatest either. I've battled depression pretty much my whole life. My mom is a control freak and still tries to control my siblings, and all she has accomplished is to push us away. Ugh, my own mom was horrible about this. Not the worst I've ever seen / heard of, but the worst out of anyone I know personally. I've talked about this somewhat before. From the time I was a small child until I was 13, my mom was a Jehovah's Witness. She's also incredibly narcissistic, an alcoholic, and emotionally unstable. I was an only child raised in a very paranoid, fear the stranger danger mindset in which I was hardly ever allowed to leave the house except to go to school. My only reprieve was the summers I stayed with my grandma, who basically let me run wild, unbeknownst to my mom. Oddly enough, my grandma was the baptized JW, while my mom was apparently just following to appease her. I was not allowed to go outside of my own yard until I was 13. The only exception was to ride my bike to one friend's house who lived down the street, and as soon as I got there I had to call from their house to let my mom know I was safe. When I was 13, I was finally allowed to ride my bike to and from school. I was not allowed to watch Disney movies because they contained magic, which is considered a tool of Satan. I was specifically not allowed to watch Ninja Turtles or Power Rangers because they promoted violence, and any other cartoons or shows that contained martial arts actions or violence were out. My list of things I could watch was limited to Nat Geo, Mr. Rogers, and cartoons on Nickelodeon. However, my parents let me watch Tremors and Jurassic Park when I was a kid, which was really confusion because they were traumatically gory to my incredibly sheltered mind. I could pretty much watch whatever I wanted at grandma's, though I wasn't allowed to have juices that weren't 100% juice or any kind of cereals with sugar. My mom would not let me brush my own teeth until I was 12, and even then she would force me to stand there while she flossed my teeth and scraped at them with a dental pick. However, she allowed me copious amounts of coffee with a ridiculous amount of creamer and as much soda as I wanted. I still can't make sense of this. My mom was incredibly strict about the things I owned and paranoid about subliminal messages. At one point she tore my bedroom apart and forced me to throw away everything I owned with a peace sign or a yin yang because they were considered blasphemous. The peace sign was apparently a cross with broken arms intended to mock Jesus, and the yin yang suggested that there could be no good without evil, which wasn't true, because Jehovah could only be good. She would read my diary and walk into my bedroom without knocking. She made me shower with her until I was 12 or 13. She picked out my outfits for me and would not even let me choose what I wanted to wear when she took me school shopping. She did my hair the way she wanted it. For the longest time I was bullied over my clothes because she dressed me like a moron with riding boots, spandex tights and heavy animal print sweaters with tassels. The only choices I ever really had were school supplies and which Happy Meal I wanted when she didn't feel like cooking, which was basically every night. I was not allowed to eat foods that she didn't personally like because she would pick off of my plate and eat my food if I didn't eat fast enough. She forced me to eat foods that she liked and I didn't, not because I wasn't eating my vegetables or whatever, but because she couldn't understand why I didn't like them and believed she could force me to point also, no boys. Period. I had one friend that was a boy in middle school / junior high, and she would eavesdrop on our incredibly seldom phone calls. I was not allowed to go anywhere with friends without an adult present until I was 13. One that always stood out to me was a couple that lived in my neighborhood. They came into money at a young age and had an elitist attitude about everything. They thought they were above everyone. We had a neighborhood pool that would close at 9 p.m. After 8 o'clock we were allowed to put up the volleyball net, so long as there was not a lot of people still there. We put up the net and started playing because we were the only people there, and at 8:30 this couple and their 5-month-old come in and get in the poo. They made sure to decide to carry the 5-month-old to the center of the pool while we were playing, then start shouting, "Stop this right now. You're going to splash my child." We just stared at her because there's tons of space on the other side of the shallow end. She continues to stare and goes, "What makes you think you can just take over the pool for your games?" At this point the lifeguard spoke up and said that we were allowed to have the net out after 8 o'clock and that there was plenty of pool for her to use. So they turn around and start yelling at all of us again. We just kept staring while she screeches about her child possibly being splashed and ear infections and whatnot. Finally my friend Alex speaks up. He said, "There's a baby pool. There's also a whole other side of the pool." She called him disrespectful and says that she couldn't believe he thought he was more important than her child. She goes on and on while we stare in silence, and finally Alex's brother, who is sitting in pool chair, says, "Hey Alex, did I tell you about that book I read?" We all just stared at him like a bunch of weirdos because it was out of the blue in the middle of this nonsense. He then continues, "It's called I Was Here First. You shut the fuck up." We faking died. The lady and her husband turned to Alex's brother and started yelling at him and demanded to know where he lived. He gave them his address and phone number. They left the pool to go tell his mommy. She basically told them to fuck off and slammed the door in their face. This is a long story. Names have been changed to protect identities. In 6th grade, we were at lunch. I was sitting near my friend Roger. Roger accidentally brought his phone to lunch, but kept it in his lunchbox. Then, this kid named Jackson came over to our table. Jackson wasn't really our friend, but we hung out with him on occasion. Since he had a Wii U and this was the Nintendo table of sorts, Jackson saw the phone in Roger's lunchbox and quickly snatched it. Roger, obviously, freaked out and tried to grab it back as quickly as possible, accidentally scratching Jackson's neck in the process. Jackson dropped the phone onto the table and fled. Everything seemed okay. Roger and I were in cross country together, and after we finished, the school counselor was down at the track to greet us. He requested we go to his office as soon as possible. I arrived first and was promptly asked inside. I was questioned on what I knew about what had happened to Jackson, but I feigned obliviousness since Roger was one of my best friends after school. Roger texted me that he wouldn't be able to go to school the next day. When I asked why, Roger didn't reply. I found out that afternoon that, allegedly, Jackson's mom had driven to the school and screamed at the receptionists in the front office. They were shocked and accidentally complied when the crazed mother demanded they suspend Roger. After the lunatic left, they called Roger's mom and said that Roger couldn't come to school the next day, but it wouldn't show up on his permanent record point. Needless to say, we are all currently shunning Jackson, who has no idea what his mom did. Point: this probably isn't the most exciting story, but Jackson's mom is definitely psycho. Probably late to this, but after breaking up pretty nastily with my ex, I started dating this girl I had met at my college. I was 20, she was 19, had her own car and everything. Pretty independent looking, right? One day, we decided to go on a pretty big date. Sadly, her car blew a tire, so we had to leave it at my parents' house and take my mum's car out. We ended up going to a pretty nice beach about 2h away from us. We had fun, totally non-sexual, by the way, and went back to my house. We chilled on my couch and ended up passing out. Again, totally non-sexual. We set no alarms, so we ended up waking up later that night around 8 p.m. or so. She begins panicking because she didn't check in with her parents. I look at my phone and notice there are no less than 30 missed calls and 10 angry voicemails from her mom, which is interesting because I know I didn't give her my phone number at any point, and neither did my girlfriend. Picks up her backpack, and I pick up my keys and we go to hop in my mum's car so we can get her home. That's when I see her parents sitting on my car, along with aforementioned ex's dad. Wait, what? I didn't get much chance to wander before girlfriend's mom begins starting a screaming match in the driveway. I apologize profusely, but she keeps screaming, after which she scruffs her daughter by her shirt and drags her to the car. Her dad looked at me, as if to say I'm so sorry. Likely didn't want to say anything in interest of not angering the mom anymore. After they took off, I asked my ex's dad what the hell just happened. Well, they knew my daughter's phone number because they used to be friends, so they called her knowing you guys were once dating, hoping to get your phone number and address. She gave them both. I don't agree with what she did, but I don't want to be involved either. Actual point fact: after a few days passed, girlfriend's parents took away her everything, so she had no way of contacting me at all. I found out more stuff. Apparently they had location tracking on her car as well, and when they showed up to where her car was and found that it wasn't where she was, they got really angry too. They also had it enabled on her phone too, but her phone was off, so it didn't work. I ended up breaking up with her a few days later. Her parents were batshit insane and way too overprotective, and after that incident, I work as a horse trainer, but teach riding lessons so my horse can pay for his own hay. Horses don't have to be expensive. Every cent I have spent on that horse he earned himself. Anyway, most parents are pretty chill and use the barn as a sort of horsey daycare so they can go shopping or something. Except this one mom, the older or more handy kids go catch, saddle and warm up my horse on their own, but I usually have him out and ready when I meet people for the first time. He also helps me break in younger or less experienced horses. So there he was, standing quiet as could be next to a little paint colt I was working with at the time, not even tied. When the silver minivan pulled up, out stepped a blonde woman and a little girl. After I introduced myself and we chatted for a second, I asked if they were ready to come meet my horse, who, if you remember, is still standing half asleep next to a colt at a tie post. The mom right away tenses up and grabs her kid's hand, therefore asking if I was sure he was a safe horse. It took a lot of self-control not to bust up laughing, but I assured her that he was very well mannered and very safe, but she didn't want to let her kid go near the colt. So I walk over to my horse, woke him up with a pat, and had him follow me over. Now he is a pretty big boy, exactly 16 hands, but is very mindful about where he puts himself, so he followed me over and very slowly reached out his nose to say hello to the little girl. When the mom pulled her back confused, he looked at me as if to say, "Duff you caught, bro?" I explained to the mom again that he was very safe and was just trying to introduce himself before she basically gave him the finger in horse. Well, I finally got the kid on the horse and the lesson proceeded in this manner for an hour. After the lesson, the girl was perfectly comfortable and was riding on her own without him following me around. Too bad the mom deemed it too risky and I never saw them again. Now I know why. I work with horses. People drive me up the faking wall. I knew a girl whose parents were quite protective. Mind you, I went to a Christian Mennonite school, so when the Harry Potter books first came out I had to read them at home, and if I wanted to take them to school, or any of my small group of friends did, we covered them in homemade book covered, and wrote a different book title on them. Interestingly, she was allowed to watch Star Wars and read the books, so she would borrow my Harry Potter books, cover them with a Star Wars title, and still hide them under her bed. I was all for reading, so I did this for her with no regrets despite understanding her parents' reasoning, but I thought that she was smart enough to understand the difference between religious ire and being able to read something, because it's interesting point she moved out of state after college, and is fine. Her parents I still find strange, but they loved her. People in this thread seem to be forgetting that there are extremists in every culture and religion, and that it's not a representation of all of those people. The extremists just get the most attention in the media and internet, and the more you go all of X is Y, the more you give the wrong people attention, and also give them more reason to shout all the louder. It's kind of painful to see myself getting generalized and lumped into the group of assholes, and I'm nowhere close to eloquent enough to argue the point that I'm not like those Christians. I've been persecuted and bullied by these kinds of Christians. They're not cool. I know how they work, and I stay well away from them. Point. Just as I doubt I could convince someone not all Christians are like that, I doubt I could convince a Christian that their behavior is far from Christ-like. This might get long. My wife's half-brother, let's call him Joe, is by far the strangest kid because of how he was raised. He is currently 24 years old and still lives with my wife's parents and works as a bagger at Publix part-time. Now, this isn't really that sad, but here is the issue. The dad, my wife and I call the stepdad either asshole or douchebag, is so extremely overprotective over him, and the boy doesn't even realize that the rules his father has him follow is not normal. Joe is completely fine with the rules and never disobeys them. The first thing that was really strange to me is the fact that Joe is not allowed to drive after dark. Again, he's 24. When he has to work a night shift at Publix, douchebag takes him to work and picks him up. Point. The next strange thing is that the kid is not allowed to drive on the interstate at all. Joe will even tell you himself that he's scared to do it and doesn't even want to, even if his douchebag told him he could. We live in Alabama. It ain't like this is some huge city with crazy traffic. Joe's been driving since he was 18. You'd think that he'd be able to do something like this by now. In the last 7 years, he's never drove to my house to see my wife, his sister, because it's impossible to get here to my house without getting on the interstate. Point. It's probably not surprising, but they are extremely religious. Joe doesn't have a car and uses his mother's car to get to work. Currently the only place that Joe can drive is from his house to his work and to his church, and when he had a girlfriend he could drive there and back home. Church is 5 miles away. Work is 10 miles away. When Joe goes anywhere, he has to call his father when he arrives at either destination to let douchebag know that he made it okay. Last week Joe forgot to call one Wednesday night when he got to church and left his phone in the car. Douchebag panicked when he wouldn't answer, and so he drove up there to the church. Make sure Joe made the 5-mile trip okay. Sometimes Joe has friends come and pick him up, and Joe has a 8 PM curfew during the week. This last one pissed me off more than anything though, and it happened a year ago. My wife has epileptic seizures which started 2 years ago at 28 years old, causing her to have to give up her driving privileges and her career as a registered nurse. This particular day, my wife's seizures were very bad. Talking scary bad. Seizures were lasting upwards of 40 to 45 minutes each, with 5 to 10 minute breaks in between before happening again. She quit breathing during a few of them, so obviously I had to rush her to the ER. Well, her mom met us up there, and of course her stepdad, douchebag, also came. So, while my wife is literally convulsing / shaking and having 30+ minute long seizures in the hospital bed, douchebag is damn near having a heart attack and worrying. But he's not worrying about his stepdaughter who's quit breathing 5 to 6 times already and can't seem to stop having seizures that could potentially cause all sorts of issues. Douchebag is stressed and panicking because he can't get a hold of Joe. Just hours before, Joe went with his grandfather to look at used trucks, but even though douchebag knew what Joe was doing and who he was with, He was worried shitless because Joe wasn't answering the phone. I'm standing next to my wife trying to talk to her while she's having back-to-back seizures and douchebag is behind me using the hospital room's phone. Point the first number he calls. I hear him say, "Hey Judy, this is douchebag. I'm your neighbor across the street. Grandparents live next door as well. Listen, I'm trying to find Joe, my son. Him and his grandfather went to look at used trucks and I can't get a hold of them. Do you think you could walk across the street and see if they are home?" I seriously couldn't believe this motherfucker just called his neighbor. Someone who it sounded like he barely knew to ask this, but it doesn't end there. Next he dials 0 and calls the operator of the hospital that we are currently in and asks the name of his son and grandfather's name, if anyone by those names has been admitted. But wait, it doesn't stop there. This motherfucker called 3 more hospitals in the area asking the same thing, thinking they were in an accident. When he started dialing a 5th number, I faking lost my cool. I turned around and said, "Are you faking serious, John?" I called him by his real name. "My faking wife, your stepdaughter is literally fighting for her life with these seizures and you're sitting here faking calling every hospital in the area, worried about Joe who's a grown-ass man, because he hasn't answered your phone call for the last hour, because he's with his grandfather truck shopping. You need to calm the fuck down. There's more important shit going on right now, and you're really starting to piss me off." I didn't even care at this point, because I was so pissed. He immediately says, "You just don't understand. You don't get it. I'm worried about Joe. He's never not answered my calls. Something must have happened." I believe my cursing made him really uncomfortable since he's religious, but he ended up leaving the room. Joe was fine, by the way. Him and his grandfather had just been test driving vehicles all day. Meanwhile, I spent the next 3 days in ICU and never seen him come back to visit again other than he called a couple times. I can give plenty more examples, but I'll end it with this last one. Joe got his first girlfriend ever at 23 years old. She was 28 years old. She lived about 30 minutes away, so Joe was allowed to go pick her up one afternoon, all back roads, and they went back to his house and watched a movie until about 11 p.m. Since Joe can't drive past dark, Joe and his girlfriend had douchebag drive her back home. This was a normal occurrence on the weekends. That douchebag brought her home. I generally feel sorry for Joe because he's been raised like this his whole life and he doesn't even know how truly faked up it is. The mother tells douchebag all the time that the way he treats Joe isn't normal. The grandparents tell him the same thing. All the family tells him this. He says that he just worries about his son and they just don't understand. My wife and I were talking about it, but if something ever happened to Joe's mom or douchebag, I don't believe Joe would be able to make it on his own. What's crazy though is that my wife and her sister had a completely normal life growing up, and douchebag only treated Joe like this. It's just weird. Dr. Father treats 24-year-old son like a 14-year-old kid and has all his life, and the kid is so mentally messed up from being treated this way his whole life that he doesn't even realize how faked up it is and that it's not normal. My mother-in-law's cousin. Holy shit. She was bullied at school due to being odd, so she ran to the only safe place she knew, religion. Attended a Catholic college, married a man she met there. No biggie, right? Wrong. She has 8 kids, the oldest being 16, who are all homeschooled. Last time I saw them, the oldest, around 13 to 14 at the time, was playing with Thomas the Tank Engine toys. None of the kids are allowed anything over the G rating, and even then not allowed some G-rated things. Aren't allowed to date until they are ready for marriage, after college, or at least in college if they're lucky. Sex is only for baby making. Missionary only. My Mel had a hysterectomy after her 4th kid and her cousin damn near stopped speaking to her because it was against God. She constantly posts on Facebook about her kids, one day posting her asking them what they loved most about her. The eldest said that he loves her because she knows everything that is right for him and she's his best friend. One kid said they are so thankful that she keeps them from becoming like the weird people you see on TV, yet they act just like the Duggars. They are not allowed to use a computer, even for typing. Only allowed to have friends in their home school and church groups. Oh, and she refuses to give birth in a hospital. Giving birth is a whole family type of thing with the other kids in the water bath with her. Her third child, I believe, almost killed her because since she was not in a hospital, nor was she seen by a doctor, she had a good chunk of placenta left inside of her. For the military folk, USMC, I have a kid in my shop who is a PFC and extremely boot at that. Now, I'm trying to paint a portrait of him without offending anyone. Fuck it, here goes. This is a type of kid that you can tell is a virgin. I mailed it on the head after 5 minutes talking to him. And I'm not talking like that is his belief of saving it till marriage or anything like that. Again, no offense to any religious/personal beliefs on the matter. I'm talking you can tell he's virgin by his mannerisms. He's 19 and not particularly bad looking, and in my experience I've seen some ugly motherfuckers get laid. He simply has zero game. It's like talking to a 13-year-old who still blows his load after seeing an exposed tit on the internet. He surely means well and all that, but I can't stand to be around him. It's as if he stopped growing mentally after elementary school points. So, to get to the overbearing parents part. His father is a warrant officer within the same MOs and stationed about 6 hours away. For those who don't know, a warrant officer is an enlisted who basically is so good at their job that they literally warrant the same rating that an officer would. It's weird, but it makes sense if you care to look. That said, this guy could potentially be a thorn in our chain of command side if he really wanted to be, since he rates much higher and is in the same field as us. Anyway, this guy will not let his son grow up. When we first got to our station, he skipped our first field day because my dad is on base and we have plans. Field day is a once a week thing where we clean the fuck out of our living quarters and get inspected the next day by higher ups. This kid basically said fuck you to his roommates and peaced out while they had to clean his sheet because daddy is a warrant officer and is here to pick him up. At first I thought whatever, maybe his dad is only around for the next day or two and really wants to see his son off at his first duty station. Fine point, then he gets visited the next weekend. This time not on field day thankfully for his roommates, but still a little oddimo. He should let his son experience the Marine Corps on his own. But, whatever, not my thing. Point, then today's bullshit happened. Point, we are getting a 96 extended weekend in honor of Labor Day just as civilians do. Well, we had somewhat of a proposition that if we passed a health and comfort inspection we would get released early to go on our 96. Okay, sweet deal. Unfortunately, we don't pass said health and comfort for reasons and lose our opportunity to get off early. Point. But that wasn't going to stop Daddy's boy. Point, upon hearing word of the deal being off, this genius skips our chain of command from talking to a lance corporal or corporal at most, straight up to a mother faking master sergeant. He skipped 5 faking ranks because my dad is a warrant officer and we had plans in conjunction with getting released early. Beach. You don't think I'd like to go home to my wife along with every other married Marine? You don't think there's other Marines around you that would have loved seeing their families and loved ones that much sooner? But you're faking special because daddy is a warrant officer. I don't mean to cut on his father by any means, but if I were in that position and my son were to pull some shit like that at his shop, I'd be faking furious. Well, long story short, Daddy's boy got his wish. He'll be by work for all of 10 to 15 minutes before being released, while the rest of us get to work a full day simply because we aren't as privileged. And he had the nerve to deny it when we got briefed about skipping the chain of command shortly thereafter. The faking nerve. Point, TLDR. New Marine needs to learn to be an adult and stop using his father for leverage simply because he holds a high and respectable rank. I was friends with a girl at the beginning of high school who was ridiculously sheltered. At that time she firmly believed that it was a sin for a woman to drive a car, anyone to talk about babies, probably to prevent any sort of such talk. Riding a bike could and most likely would cause irreparable damage to your body and a whole heap of weird stuff. Around the house she wasn't allowed to do basic stuff, even cooking, because her parents believed that that wasn't a woman's place. Even her homework was for women to do. Her dad did it for her each night after work. And she wasn't oblivious to the fact that she couldn't do anything either, but she was too young to move out and didn't want to face her parents' wrath anyway. I really didn't know how bad it actually was until a couple of years ago, when I was 22. She basically decided to break away from her parents and surprisingly they let her go willingly. Thing was, she didn't know how to do anything, even microwaving, not to mention all the bills and maintenance that come with living in your own home. At this point I hadn't spoken to her in years, but because she had been so sheltered she only had 5 contacts in her phone. Her parents, a grandmother, her doctor and me. So she called me in tears and I ended up driving her 5 hours to a 3-week course for people who had been raised like her. Haven't heard from her since, but I hope she's doing okay though. She was always really nice despite everything. Point edit. I also wasn't allowed in her house because they had seen me with my baby cousin one time and were convinced that I was a teen mom and therefore a child of Satan. This family was not at all religious either, but still taught their daughter that half of social norms would land her in hell. The weirdest thing was how normal they were when other adults were around. My mother didn't believe me about any of it until a couple of years back when she called me, and even now she has doubt. If you ask me, that just shows that those people knew they were mistreating their daughter, and that's the sickest part. My dad's, thankfully, ex-girlfriend Sandra had a son Luke who she mollycoddled to the point it kind of made me ill. She used to shave him, scrub his back in the bath and wash his balls, literally with her hands. He was in his late teens/early 20s when I knew the guy. He was also an asshole and was awful to her, although she had a fair few mental issues as well, and that is putting it mildly. She used to basically do everything for him. Sandra was also incredibly controlling and jealous of my dad's time and anyone who interrupted any attention he gave out. My younger brother had a Christmas dinner with them once, and Luke did nothing but talk shit the entire time, when my dad had already told us stories about how his mother barely stopped short at wanking him off every night, so we were not having any of it. My brother is much less of a cooler head than I, and he is also much larger than me, taller, more athletic and very financially successful. I can't remember exactly what Luke said to him to provoke him, but Luke clearly was under the impression that he was under his mother's protection, so he could say whenever he wanted, and my brother ended up slapping him one. Luke literally went crying to his mother about it. She expected my dad to tell us off. Bear in mind my brother and I were in our mid-20s at this point. My dad told her that he trusted our judgment and wouldn't have done it without reason because he knew what an asshole little man-child Luke was. My dad was basically on a rebound after splitting from my mum at the time, and as soon as he wizened up he got the fuck out. When he tried to get the fuck out she pulled a knife on him. My sister-in-law has a 1-year-old. For the past year she has been insufferable. They came over for dinner the other day, and we had some toys sitting on the floor for our niece to play with. While she's sitting there playing with my wife, who is also her nanny, she glances over at the TV that my brother and I were watching. My sister-in-law comes darting across the room and holds her hand in front of her eyes. She's not allowed to watch TV. I said, but she wasn't actually watching it. She just glanced over, to which she responded, I read an article online that watching TV between the ages of 0 to 3 causes developmental setbacks and issues. I asked if she could show me the article. She brought it up on her phone. The study was concerning children who watch something like 6+ hours of television daily with little other stimuli. She was taking the conclusions of this study and applying it to the 10 or so seconds her daughter was glancing at the television. There are a lot more instances of weirdness. Basically, my sister-in-law had a drug addict mother who was married 7 times. Her mom would abandon them for weeks at a time with no food. She didn't have proper health care as a child, proper nurture, proper education. She didn't learn how to read until she was in 2nd grade. As a result, she's drastically overcompensating in the mom department. She is the type of person who will read any article on a half-reputable website, skew it to fit her preconceived notions, and shut out the rest of the world's advice and wisdom. My wife has been a nanny/daycare employee for 10 years and has had more experience with infants and toddlers than many people could gather in a lifetime. In spite of this, my sister-in-law constantly ignores her suggestions and observations in favor of something she read in an online article. My aunt. For years, my aunt was a cool aunt. She traveled, went to concerts, was hip, not married. She insisted she didn't want to get married or have kids. When she was about 40, she changed her mind and decided to marry this guy, Brian, who she'd been dating and living with for a few years. Brian was hilarious and my family all liked him, and we thought my aunt had simply just found the right person and changed her mind. Everyone was happy for her. After they got married, they decided to have kids. This raised more of an eyebrow, because my aunt has never been the maternal type. She's a fairly impatient person and prone to jump from thing to thing and just didn't seem like an ideal candidate for the stable environment that is good for kids. But she insists that this is something she wants with her husband and they are taking it seriously, and blah blah blah. Plus she's 41 at this point, so who can really tell her what to do? She has 2 kids with her husband, and suddenly becomes incredibly religious. My family is technically Catholic, but we are not strict about it beyond parents insisting on the sacraments, baptism, communion, confirmation. We don't pray before meals, go to confession, or even go to church regularly. But she suddenly was very into religion. The kids start to get a little older and it just gets more fanatical. She insists that, if we are in the children's presence, we pray before meals with them. If the kids had a sleepover with my grandparents or any of their cousins on a Saturday night, they had to go to church on Sunday. Even if my aunt wasn't there to bring them, she expected anyone who was caring for them to just go to church on Sunday, because she felt it was so important. She needed Catholic preschool, not cheap, and Catholic elementary and middle schools for them too. In the meanwhile, she's in credit card debt up to her ears and her house is about to foreclosed upon. They were not allowed any snacks with sugar, and they weren't allowed to watch TV. I don't have kids, so maybe I just don't understand, but to me moderation seems like it's key. TV and sugar are bad in large doses, yes, but I don't see anything wrong with Sesame Street or a piece of cake every so often. Well, it totally backfired once they were old enough to realize they were missing something. They would go on playdates and just get loaded on snacks, to the point of sneaking them behind their friends' backs and raiding their snacks. If a kid brought in birthday cupcakes or something, which my aunt told the teacher not to let her kids have that stuff, they'd get to those too and get super hyper. Whenever they came to my mom's house without their parents, they just wanted to watch TV and movies so they could understand some of the things their friends talked about in school. It was just kind of sad. I can only imagine what they tried to do when they weren't supervised. In the meanwhile, my aunt's marriage went sour somewhere along the way and my now uncle stopped showing up to most family occasions. No holidays, not my grandparents' 50th anniversary dinner, not even my grandfather's wake. He's become increasingly rude, and on several occasions, has said insulting things to my grandmother. When he does make a rare appearance at whatever family occasion, he acts like he's too good for all of it, like we're beneath him, and things between me and my aunt are really tense. They are either ignoring one another, or snapping at one another. Between that and their method of raising their children, my aunt and uncle have really failed my cousins. The older one acts like his father, and is really rude to everyone, my aunt especially, and the younger one is attached to my aunt's hip, and can't even have a sleepover without her. She's 11. Not because she's not allowed to, for once, but because she gets terrible separation anxiety when she's away from her mother. All in all, it just bums me out. I can't know this for sure, but I really think my aunt was right that she shouldn't have kids, let herself be talked into it anyway, and then became religious to please her husband. Don't change for anyone, kids, it does not work out. My best friend's mum was super strict with her. Her mum would attend all school excursions, which wasn't that weird in early years of primary school, because parents would be invited to come. I guess it was like extra supervision or whatever, but she would still be doing it. When we were in grades 5 and 6 etc, she wasn't allowed to go to people's parties if they didn't know the parents personally and know exactly what would be happening at the parties, right up to when we were 18 as well. If we went to the shops, her mum would generally just stay at the shops the whole time, which at the time she would say, because she didn't want to drive back and forth. But in hindsight it was barely a 15-minute drive to the shopping center. When she got her learner's permit, her mum didn't want her to drive in most conditions or on busy roads. When she got her license, she didn't want her driving, but it just happened that her mum had broken her shoulder so couldn't physically do the school run. So my friend was allowed to drive her sister and herself to school. If we went to things like a movie, her mum would walk her up to the ticket booth and be waiting on the lobby when the movie was finished to pick us up. After September 11th, She would have been 16 or 17 at the time. Her mum didn't want her going into the city. We live in Melbourne, Australia. When we finished high school she was already 18 and was going to Schooler's Week, but her parents tried to ban her and took her car off her. Also after she turned 18 her parents didn't want her going out to nightclubs or drinking and she wasn't allowed out past midnight and then not past 1 AM. When they moved house. The funny part about the whole situation is her two older siblings used to go out to nightclubs underage and just generally do what they like, and her younger sister was a wild child who ended up having a kid at 15. Oh, let's see, I've got a few. There's my ex's parents who were pretty crazy. They've homeschooled her on and off throughout the years. As far as I know, she's still being homeschooled as a high school senior and used to greatly restrict who she was allowed to hang out with. This is all high school. They also only let her use a cell phone occasionally, rarely even let her bring it to school, would punish her for the slightest things, and forced her to stop using her Facebook, and eventually made her delete it. There's also my friend at school, whose mom is crazy overprotective. Yesterday when I was on the phone with her, she told her mom she was talking to another mutual friend, so they wouldn't make her hang up. They don't know who I am, and her mom got on the phone to talk to me to see if it really was said friend. When I explained to was another friend, she told me you can hang up now, and when my friend tried to explain her mom told her you can tell them goodbye. Also they only allow her to have an old flip phone, and they shut off her texting. Then there's one of my best friend's parents who I think are legit crazy. Mom has bad bipolar and possibly bad anxiety. Mom's boyfriend is just a huge dick in general. Real dad had a stroke years ago and is doomed to a nursing home. They GPS track her phone everywhere she goes and punish her if she turns off the 3 grams. Her mom's boyfriend also gets a copy of every text message she gets. He's not her dad, and they both go through her phone. They'll also only allow certain friends to stay at their house after 9. They also treat her basically like Cinderella, are complete idiots, and make her life terrible. Mostly her mom's boyfriend, but that's another story. I worked as an advisor in the advising center as a graduate assistant in criminology program. After 2 years I moved on and became a teaching associate. One day I was warming up my lunch between classes when the head of the advising center saw me. "Taxiran, I have a dad and son coming in, and Dr. G's father just had a heart attack. I have to cover her class. You know everything you need to about the program. Will you please cover this meeting for me? Please?" Of course I'm not going to say no. I'm not a horrible human being most of the time, so I meet with them. First red flag goes up when the introductions are made and the father tells me I'm not to address his son, only him. Dude, your kid is the one who may go here. It's hard for me to help him without talking to him because experience taught me during week 1, students and parents usually don't think exactly alike. Enter a grueling multi-hour question and answer. I answered everything I could for this guy, tried to engage his son a few more times, got shot down angrily by the dad each time, and never once let my smile leave my face. By the end of it he's like, "So what if my son doesn't want to be a cop? Go into probation, do social work, be a security guard, go into jails or prisons, go into a therapy role, work with a non-profit, go to law school, go into a state or federal agency, etc." Through every possible career route we covered. Well sir, then maybe he needs to look at another degree. If you have an idea of something else, I'd be glad to help you look into it or schedule a meeting with someone. He pretty much stormed out, kid in tow, and giving me an apologetic look. My former boss asked me how it went when he was done with the class he covered and his class that met directly after that one. I don't think I got them. Well, can't win 'em all. Let me get you a pizza for dinner since I cost you a lunch break. In a class on pedagogy, one thing a professor told me was, half of teaching is acting. Her point was that you may not want to be there, but attitude flows from the top, so you always pretend your best that you want to be there. You may be tired, suffering from allergies, and ready to drop dead, but damn it, you will put your best foot forward, and you will make an effort to appear to be at ease while discussing the material. Thus far it's been great advice, and dealing with helicopter parents who accompany potential students, it's always been extremely valuable. One of my college roommates would often sleep through his early classes if left to his own devices. So his mom would call his cell phone every morning, sometimes multiple times, to wake him up. When he stopped answering the calls, his parents sent him back to school after Thanksgiving break with a landline phone. In 2011, she would then call his cell phone in the morning, and if he didn't answer, call the landline. She would even call it in the morning if he wasn't there or actually was at class. I started unplugging it whenever he wasn't home. There was also a girl I went to high school with who had super strict parents. Whenever we went on a class trip, our parents would have to sign a permission slip saying we were allowed to watch PG-13 movies on the bus. It was some sort of school rules formality. Even in high school, her parents were the only ones who wouldn't sign off on those slips. There would usually be 2 buses on trips. Whichever bus she was, couldn't watch anything above PG. She also once asked a teacher what circumcision meant when we were in 12th grade, so I imagine there was a lot of shelteredness going on in her house. On one occasion, when he didn't answer either phone, she called the front desk of our dorm building and sent one of the girls working there to come up to our room, knock on the door, and wake him up. A girl I know, almost 19 now, was raised by extremely religious parents, more so her mom than her dad. Yes, I know, religious is not synonymous with batshit insane, but I digress. She only just now got her first cell phone. She's had 2 FB accounts since she turned 18, both of which were either taken over by her dad or deleted because she was talking inappropriately with her boyfriend in the chat. She's 18. She has natural human desires, you faking monsters. Before meeting her boyfriend, she was asked to dinner on a non-romantic non-date dinner party at a local steak house by a male friend, just friend, and he mother said she couldn't go because he was male. She's 18. She's only allowed to see her boyfriend at the community college she attends. When I go over to her house, she lives with her parents still. We are not allowed to sit in her bedroom and chat. Every time we spend more than 5 minutes up there, her mom calls up to us from the stairs with her shrill, banshee voice and shrieks everyone needs to be downstairs if they want to talk. No privacy. Her mother hates me for being the weird goth slash redneck slash general not as holy as her Christian. I'm laid back, and I love Jesus, so it took forever for her to allow my friend to drive my home from somewhere alone in her own car. When my friend is out on her own, she's going to get in so much trouble. The things she already does and knows worries me. I'm afraid her parents' overzealous approach at parenting is going to get her hurt or killed when she finally rebels. I'm a little late to the party, so this might get buried, but one instance that comes to mind is this family down the street. When we were kids growing up, their 2 kids, son and daughter, were about me and my brother's age, so played with them a lot. Their parents wouldn't let them watch cartoons like Cat Dog or SpongeBob because it was unnatural and evil. Because God didn't create half dog half cat things or talking sponges. Took the parents forever to let the kids come to my house, and then they sent a whole bunch of pre-approved VHS tapes and games with them, and we weren't allowed to do anything else. Another instance is this girl I dated in middle school and part of high school. For the most part, her mom was super nice to me. I was over at their house all the time, went on family trips with them, she paid for so much shit for me, etc. Great family. Except when it came to basketball, my girlfriend played. You'd think this 13-year-old girl was in something better than the WNBA the way her mom treated her, yelling at her from the stands and shit. I was with them a lot after the games too. Even if her team won and she did well, the mom would just nitpick and berate her to the point of tears, never telling her she was proud or talking about anything good she did. Just straight negative, in no way constructive criticism. Just completely destroying this girl in middle school's happiness, confidence, everything. No matter what, 14-year-old me just wanted to deck this mostly nice lady in the face after every game. Really late to thread, but want to contribute, because lots of crazy stories. Friends' parents installed cameras to monitor who they were hanging out with at all times. Another friend recently got married and is pregnant. Got pregnant before the wedding. Has to hide this from her parents because they're crazy. Even when she was well past 18, they didn't want her dating. Also, when she went to college, she wasn't allowed to live on or near campus, so she was forced to commute 1 to 2 hours every day. This is a problem when your school is off any freeway in Southern California. 405 equals world's largest parking lot. My parents let me go to prom only on the premise that my older cousin, by 3 years, drove me to dinner with the group, and then they'd pick me up after. They were obviously the only parents there to pick me up. Really embarrassing. Former roommate lived with us for 24 hours, and then she had her entire family come move out all of her stuff, while my other roomie and I were napping without telling us. The reason? The mom got bad vibes from us, and she also started yelling at us about how her daughter is the life of the party, and how dare we treat her terribly. We didn't. We all hung out the night before. My parents never let me spend the night at any of my friends' houses growing up besides my cousin, because they feared my friends' dads would molest me. Another friend's parents forced her to play the piano for hours on end, until she got the piece perfect. They were really restrictive about letting her leave the house if it wasn't for any academic or extracurricular activities, except in the case of her hanging out with a family friend's daughter. Really late to thread, but want to contribute, because lots of crazy stories. Friends' parents installed cameras to monitor who they were hanging out with at all times. Another friend recently got married and is pregnant. Got pregnant before the wedding. Has to hide this from her parents because they're crazy. Even when she was well past 18, they didn't want her dating. Also, when she went to college, she wasn't allowed to live on or near campus, so she was forced to commute 1 to 2 hours every day. This is a problem when your school is off any freeway in Southern California. 405 equals world's largest parking lot. My parents let me go to prom only on the premise that my older cousin, by 3 years, drove me to dinner with the group, and then they'd pick me up after. They were obviously the only parents there to pick me up. Really embarrassing. Former roommate lived with us for 24 hours, and then she had her entire family come move out all of her stuff, while my other roomie and I were napping without telling us. The reason? The mom got bad vibes from us, and she also started yelling at us about how her daughter is the life of the party, and how dare we treat her terribly. We didn't. We all hung out the night before. My parents never let me spend the night at any of my friends' houses growing up besides my cousin, because they feared my friends' dads would molest me. Another friend's parents forced her to play the piano for hours on end, until she got the piece perfect. They were really restrictive about letting her leave the house if it wasn't for any academic or extracurricular activities, except in the case of her hanging out with a family friend's daughter. The worst example I can think of is when I was 13 or 14, I think. One of my mom's friends had given her basketball tickets to give to me. I don't particularly enjoy sports, but I also didn't want to be wasteful, so I called one of my friends who I knew actually enjoyed basketball to see if he wanted to go. He did, so we made the arrangements and everything seemed fine. Come the day of game, I'm standing around a block away from the arena waiting for him. He shows up with his mom. They don't have a car, so she just went with him on public transportation. She asked me where my dad was, which I found hilarious, because he pieced out of my life day one, and I told her he wasn't here. She asked if any adults were waiting at the arena, and I said no, kinda confused at this point. So she immediately starts bawling and launches off into a furious tirade about how this country is dangerous. I live in Canada, yeah, and you never know what kind of people are around waiting to kidnap you. Keep in mind this is a, 40-ish-year-old woman crying her eyes out and yelling to a 14-year-old in public about how terrible the country is. My friends tries reasoning with her, explaining that we were fine, and that nobody could possibly do anything to us in an arena with thousands of people and security guards and cameras everywhere, but she wasn't having it. She grabbed his hand and pulled him along with her as they left. I've never been more bewildered in my life. I didn't really have any other choice but to shrug and go home. When I got home, my mom asked what happened, and I told her. She claimed that his mom was being ridiculous. Happened to me. I was 18 at the time, 19 now, still living at home, and wanted to go bowling with a few friends. One of my friends was back from college for 4 days and I probably won't see him again for another 2 years. I told my mom I wasn't gonna be home for supper, that I was going out to eat and going bowling with a couple friends. She asked who I was going with, and I told her it was Bobby, friend at college, Kyle, longtime friend, and Aaron, another longtime friend. She said she didn't want me hanging out with Bobby and Kyle. I asked why. She said because Kyle drinks. No, he doesn't, and Bobby didn't have anything positive to say about stuff the last time she talked to him. So I stayed home, and my friends went out to eat, and didn't even go bowling, because it wouldn't have been fun without the whole group of us. I told them what she said about them, and now Bobby won't hardly talk to me. He was practically the big brother I never had, and now our conversations are bare minimum. Kyle's parents went through a divorce and he sided with his mom. He didn't talk to his dad for a couple months, and that was another reason they didn't want me to be around Kyle. They said that he has a problem and they don't want me to be like him. So she basically destroyed 2 of my very few friendships. Instead of going bowling that night, I laid in my bed and watched The Wolf of Wall Street on Netflix. That weekend I hung out with my uncle/boss man and drank beer and whiskey and had a slap happy time. A bit late, but I'll still post in case anyone is still checking the new comments. I attended university about 200 miles from home in another country. If I wanted to use my cell phone with my existing phone plan, it would have been ridiculously expensive. My mom and my brother accompanied me for the move-in weekend prior to orientation week, both to help me with my stuff, but also as an excuse to see a nice city in a foreign country. They left Sunday mid-afternoon. Monday night I had a girl over and someone knocked on the door. The girl and I figured it was just somebody trying to meet other people on the floor and we were doing more important things, so we chose to ignore the knock. The person knocks again, much louder, and declares campus security. The campus security guy had to step into my room to make sure I was safe, then told me that my concerned parent was worried because she hadn't heard from me since a phone call before I got on a flight for college alone 3 days prior. After he saw I was safe and told me why he was there, he left and told me to talk to my poor parents. Why? Did my mom feel the need to involve campus security? Because she sent me one text message in the middle of that day which I obviously did not receive because my phone was on airplane mode, and then one Facebook message in the late evening, maybe 3 hours before campus security paid me a visit. Over the summer I chose to work a barely better than minimum wage job which just barely covered rent, utilities, food, and a bit of spending money, rather than go back home and deal with 4 months of living with my mom. I worked Wednesday, Saturday, and my mom was aware of this. One Monday, I ignored a Facebook message for about 4 hours because I was playing video games. Before I got around to responding to her, she had apparently called the store I worked at asking if I had missed my recent shifts and got in contact with my brother. I got an email from the head boss of the store explaining that my mom was trying to get in touch with me. 2 days later, when I was at work, a guy my age came into the store and looked at some merchandise for a bit before I could walk over to him and ask if he needed help finding anything, as we were supposed to do. One of the managers, not the person who emailed me, pulled me aside and said he had come in before asking for me without saying why, and that the manager was prepared to call the police if I felt unsafe because this stranger was seemingly harassing me. The manager and I approached the stranger together and found out he was one of my brother's friends who my brother had enlisted to check on me. I'm now out of school living with my mother, desperately trying to find a job to get as far away as possible. My brother has a graduate degree, lives in a different time zone, and still talks to her every single night. Even days when he goes out drinking with his friends, he still finds the time, while drunk, to call my mom and talk about how their respective days had been. Needless to say, I had no life outside of school prior to college, and time spent at home is not exactly fun. If anybody is interested, I have more stories, but this post has already become quite lengthy as is. Keep in mind that my mother was never strict about me dating, partying, or doing well in school. I won't get into her cliché Jesus freak phase, but these points came to mind. 1. I started showering daily, rather than every couple of days at 13, and I shaved my pubic hair for the first time and she blocked the bathroom door, screamed at me, and repeatedly asked who I was having sex with. I didn't lose my virginity until 18. 2. I wasn't allowed to have any social media until I was 16 under the condition that my mother had my password. I once got in trouble for using the word over as in an informative status. She would delete any post that had LMAO or anyone that didn't follow her censorship rules on my wall. 3. Our computer was password protected and I had to ask permission to use it. Most of the time it was a no. That lasted until I got my own laptop for college. 4. At 17, I walked out of my neighbor/friend Katie's house to find several neighbors pointing at me. My mom had been knocking on everyone's doors, circling the block in her car, and calling my friends and their parents trying to find me. I told her where I was going, but we were in the basement and couldn't hear her knocking. Could have been solved if I had a phone. But, point 5. I wasn't allowed to have a phone until I was 18. 6. At 18 my curfew was 10 PM. My friend was driving me home. We had turned down the street at 9:59 and I got a call. It was her saying you've got 1 minute 7. My senior prom ended at 11 o'clock. Still had to be home at 10:0.8. Now I'm 20 and my curfew is 1 AM. My mom works at 5 AM. Last week I reached for the front door at 1:02 AM and before I grabbed the handle, she opened it from the inside and said you're late. She stayed up despite working in the morning and had been waiting at the front room table for me to arrive.